Wednesday afternoon, everyone. I'm WSAZ's Kimberly Keggy. Thanks for joining us here for WSAZ Plus. If you just were with us on the streaming service, you may have saw Sports Plus on the road at Hurricane High School. Really exciting. And Joseph interviewed some great young student athletes who are working really hard throughout the year. Some of them just now getting into that training session. But the reason why I wanted to do a special afternoon session here on WSAZ Plus, we're talking about data breaches. A lot of us have been impacted or affected by those, and it feels like we start to hear more and more and more about them. It's just something that we live in the world with technology right now. It's something that we can't let our guard down. And really the safeguards that are in place to help protect your data across the scope of the technology in the world that we live in is quite different. And so we are going to go ahead and break those down. You may have heard really the biggest one lately is conduit. And we're going to pull up some information so we can talk about it. Really, they're not the only ones. We hear about this, but this is one that's really making a large amount of headlines across the country because it's affecting so many people. The U.S. Attorney General for the state of Texas saying that this may be one of the largest across the country when we're talking about data breaches. And so here to help us break it all down, James Lee, who is the president of the Identity Theft Resource Center. I'm going to go ahead and bring him in so that we can talk about it. James, we appreciate you joining us this afternoon. It really feels like we're starting to get more data breaches than junk mail nowadays.
Sure seems that way. We're certainly seeing a dramatic increase, especially over the last 3 years, in the sheer number of data breaches that are reported. And the number of people who receive multiple data breach notices a year is also increasing. So yeah, it's really easy to kind of fall into that, here's another one kind of mentality when you either get that letter in the mail or sometimes by email now. Yeah, it is something that people are paying attention to, but it is definitely an issue that is growing.
James, as we are looking throughout and we're hearing more about those data breaches, something that caught me by surprise from the Identity Theft Resource Center, they said 80% of Americans, U.S. consumers, have received notification of a data breach impacting them within the last 12 months. And I was quite shocked when I heard that because we hear that they're so more common, but it's really taking a lot of us by surprise sometimes when we hear and we see about that.
And that's the highest number we've seen. That has grown steadily over the last several years. If we were talking about this pre-pandemic, it would have been around half of adults. But now we're talking about 80% of adults. And what we're also seeing, but it's very difficult to quantify, is the number of children whose identities are also being compromised in these data breaches, because so many of these data breach notices are from healthcare organizations and education organizations that have information on children. So it's not just an adult problem anymore. It is a universal problem if you live in the United States.
And so the latest to hit headlines is Conduit data breach. The company is known as Conduit Business Services, and I myself was a victim of that as well. It's a company I didn't recognize. I had to do some homework, and when I got the letter in the mail, first off, I was really caught by surprise because that letter came just this past February. But we learned that the data breach actually happened in 2024. And so the first thing that caught me by surprise, and I'll admit, I thought it was a scam because of the amount of time that they had passed. So James, when we're talking about accountability for, those companies that are required to report that, and if you haven't heard of the Conduit data breach, you may want to check into it because here's some information for you. It's a company that provides third-party printing, mailroom service, and back office support services. So the company discovered, and this was all in the letter that I received, the company discovered that it was in fact the victim of a cyber attack. Now this happened on January 13th, 2025 is when they realized it. So the investigation that they determined revealed that sensitive data was accessed by a third party Now, listen to these dates from October 21st, 2024 through January 13th, 2025. And then I didn't receive a notification from the company itself until February of 2026. On the letter that they sent me, it was postmarked, had the date up in the corner there as December 31st. But I didn't even receive the letter until about 2 months afterwards. So, James, I was really caught by surprise on this. And for anybody who is there any type of accountability for those companies when you do fall victim to being, a victim of that data breach?
Yeah, this is a very interesting case, and it does point out one of the issues that we've talked about in our most recent annual data breach report. Which, by the way, I got one of those letters too.
Oof.
Um, uh, and the issue is this: we've been tracking data breaches at the ITRC for 20 years now. This is our 20th report, and everything that we are doing, everything we have done, has got us to where we are, which means we're in a situation of ever increasing data breaches, ever increasing data breach notices, and there's not much that's going on that's going to change that. In fact, there are a lot of factors that we're seeing that point to a continued increase in the number of data breaches and then the follow-on effects of that. Data breaches are the fuel for identity theft, fraud, and scams. So the fact that we are 20 years later, when data breach notices were supposed to make companies avoid having data breaches because it didn't want the reputational damage, the financial damage that comes from them being a victim of a data breach, that hasn't worked. So this concept of notice stopping data breaches hasn't worked. So it's time to try something different. We really do need to have a holistic view now and a wholly different approach to how we're going to protect people's individual information and what happens when there is a data breach and what we can do to prevent them from happening.
Yeah, I think as we are, unfortunately, this is the world that we live in. And so we will expect to see more data breaches happen. You may have heard James mention at the beginning of when we first started talking this afternoon, they saw more than half of an increase since the pandemic in data breaches alone. And so the Identity Theft Resource Center actually tracked more than 3,000 data breaches just in the last year alone. They put out a report every year. This is now the company's 20th, I believe, report that they've put together that really helps kind of track and paint the picture of what some of the largest data breaches are, what you can find out, what companies are looking for, or what we've seen, come across the internet. And so when we're looking and we're talking about data breaches, is there any type of notification requirements, or does it vary for different companies, James?
The actual event occurred in the previous year, in 2024. So again, this is one of those things about data breach notices. They are creatures of state law. So every state has a different definition of personally identifiable information. That's the information that will trigger a data breach notice. So every state has a different definition. They all have a different threshold. How many people have to be impacted before there's a data breach notice? And then the laws get into, well, what information has to be shared with individuals? And what kind of resources do you have to make available to the victims of these data breaches so they can protect their identities going forward? And traditionally, that has been now required by most state laws, credit monitoring. Well, let's pick that apart a little bit. So in this case of like Conduit, so you're talking about something that affects people all over the country, but I guarantee you nobody ever heard of Conduit until they receive that letter. So there's no explanation about who their customer is. You don't know the actual source of the data breach. Because you didn't have a relationship with Conduit, you had a relationship with a provider. You don't know who that provider is. So we don't have that kind of information. Mm-hmm. It doesn't tell us what actually happened. So knowing what happened helps us be able to better protect ourselves. It also helps other businesses be able to prepare for a similar attack so they can protect their customers' data. So those data breach laws fail in that area. And the other disturbing trend we've seen as a result of this kind of approach, of the state by state approach, is that now 70% of all data breach notices don't actually have any actionable information. There's not anything in there that actually tells you what happened, why it happened, what they are going to do to make sure it never happens again. And in many cases, it doesn't even tell you what information was actually compromised. There may be something there in a broad term that says personally identifiable information or sensitive information, but it won't tell you that it was my full social security number, my partial social security number, my driver's license number, whatever it may be, depending on what state you're in, is going to determine what kind of information you find. That's a problem. Where you live should not have any impact on the information you were told, when you were told, how you were told, and the resources made available to you. Some states have very robust laws. Some states have very non-robust laws.
James, I am so surprised by that because I didn't know that. And, you know, we live in our region's a little bit of a tri-state area. So we've got West Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio. And so to know that there are different ramifications, or I guess a better word for that would be requirements for what you have to find out if you are a victim of a data breach, I think is so interesting. And the conduit data breach in particular affected people in Georgia, South Carolina, New Jersey, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, New Mexico, Kentucky, Ohio, West Virginia. I know several of people from our company here were affected by that data breach. So it's really interesting to me to hear that the notification requirements are not the same. So do you have any tips for us on how we can better protect ourselves, how we can make sure that our data isn't falling into the wrong hands?
There's a couple of things that I think we should all do ahead of time. And if you haven't done it when you actually receive that letter, it's very important that you take these steps immediately. So first of all, you should read the letter there, because where you are may determine you get more information, right? And there's still going to be information in there that's useful to you. If you need to freeze your credit, there's going to be information in there about how to contact the credit bureau. There may be offers of some sort of recovery service. Now in the conduit, they provide credit monitoring, I believe. And credit monitoring is great. But here's the thing you should do before you receive a data breach notice. And if you haven't done it before, do it immediately when you receive that letter. And that is freeze your credit. That stops something from happening. Credit monitoring tells you if it happened, and that's important, but it doesn't stop anything from happening. A credit freeze stops someone who has stolen your identity from being able to open up accounts in your name, maybe apply for a job in your name, go for insurance in your name. Any of those actions that can trigger a credit report, it stops it dead in its tracks. So freeze your credit first and foremost. Second thing is, make sure you are using a different password on every account you have. Now, I know people are rolling their eyes and they're going, oh, I can't. There's too many. We now have tools built into all our devices that help us create passwords and remember them for us so we don't have to. They're password managers. They're built into your phone. Excuse me. They're built into your phone. They're built into your tablet. They're built into your laptop or desktop. And they're in the operating system. Use those tools. If you want even more protection, there are password managers that you can download as separate apps, and they work fine. There's a better way, though, than even passwords, and that is passkey. So that's the replacement for passwords. Folks may have actually noticed every now and then they'll get a little prompt when they log in somewhere. It says, would you like to create a passkey? And when you see that, you want to say yes, because what that does is it replaces the need for a password. So it means that never again do you have to remember anything. The way you log on to your device, whether it's your finger, your face, a PIN code, that's the same way you will now access those accounts where you have a passkey. That does two things. That makes sure you can never voluntarily give away your password. You can't be tricked into giving away a password if somebody's trying to scam you. Why? Because you'll never see it. You'll never see the code that actually connects you into your account.
Mhm.
The other thing is it's never stored at the business. So if they have a data breach, they cannot lose control of the access code to get into your account. Why is that important? The biggest data breaches we've seen over the last several years have all been using stolen logins and passwords. The bad guys love them because that gets them into not only individual accounts, but gets them to business accounts. So if you have passkey, those things can't happen anymore. So we really encourage people to set those up. And at a minimum, if you're still using a password, use something called multi-factor authentication. Most people are used to that by now. That's a little code that gets texted to you. It's even better if you use an app. There are authenticator apps, so you can have that code sent to an app, not just by text. And that way, even if you do compromise the login, they're not going to be able to easily get the code to be able to go ahead and complete opening up your account. So those are the things that are most important that people do on the front end before a data breach, and also if they get that letter, if they haven't done it ahead of time. There's one new thing we ask people to do. That is, think about asking organizations, how are you protecting my data? How are you keeping me safe? And if you don't like the answer, you need to be prepared to go find someplace else to do business. Because the fact of the matter is, there are organizations that try very, very hard, and they are successful 99.99% of the time. Those are the organizations you want to do business with because they're doing everything they can to protect your data. But there are still other organizations that they're not adding multi-factor authentication. They're not adding passkeys. They're not adopting good cybersecurity practices. They're not adapting good information management practices where they collect too much information about you and don't give you the ability to say, don't use or sell that data. So ask yourself and that business, what are you doing to protect my information? And then be able to be ready to go do business someplace else if you don't like the answer.
James, I think you brought up some great tips for people. And really, I'm glad that you brought up about credit monitoring and putting that credit freeze being one of the most important things that we can do. I'm glad that you brought that up because I necessarily wasn't aware of that either. I knew that you could credit freeze, and I knew it was a great tool for after a data breach, but I didn't realize the importance of doing it prior and even once you receive the notification. From your area of expertise, is there, or what is the biggest red flag or even mistake that you see that people who maybe fall victim to being the data breach, what would you recommend for people?
Well, I think the main thing is people they underestimate the value of their own data. They think that, it's never going to happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it does, they go, well, it's my driver's license number. What can they do with that? We tend to think that our most important piece of information is our social security number. And once upon a time, that was true. It's not today. Any amount of information in the hands of an identity criminal can be really, really problematic. And in some cases can be absolutely devastating. So something as simple as your driver's license, you need to protect that the same way you would your social security number. You need to protect your login and password the same way. And so I think it's really, we need to do a better job of helping people understand that all of their data is important and it all needs to be protected equally, and that it is all of our responsibilities. We have a responsibility just like the business does and just like the government does. The government has to put in place laws and regulations. The companies have to put in good cybersecurity and follow those laws and regulations, but we have to also protect ourselves. Because at the end of the day, we are the most responsible for ourselves, and keeping the right kind of information protected in the right ways.
All right, James, thank you so much for giving us some of those great tips. A fantastic way to really help keep us all informed and protect your data at home. You heard James mention, really, you've got to switch that mindset from a reactive to a proactive. this is the world that we live in, and data breaches are likely going to be more common. James mentioned how they've already seen those numbers double since the pandemic. And again, last year, and he said more than 3,000 data breaches were reported. So really great information for a lot of us. We're not immune to data breaches, but we can be proactive and help protect ourselves. So this is a special edition of WSAZ Plus, and thank you so much for joining us here for the afternoon. We wanted to make sure that everybody was able to stay up to date and have a great way to protect yourselves, have some valuable information. I think a lot of us are taking something away. I know I am. I wasn't aware about the different notification requirements, and I thought that part was really, really interesting. To know that if I live in one state, it doesn't mean that I'm going to get all of the information of the data breach. So we certainly appreciate you joining us here on WSAZ Plus. Hope you guys have a fantastic Wednesday, and don't forget you can join us at 4, 5, and 6 o'clock tonight on WSAZ for a look at what's happening in our communities, and we're going to have some exciting things as well that we're following. So we do appreciate you joining us here. Have a great day, everybody.